Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. Hi, Jonathan Goldhill here, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And today I have a guest on that I haven't seen in 20 years and was a professor of mine. So let me introduce Vijay Sathe. He is the CS and DJ Davidson Chair and Professor of Management at the Drucker School of Management, named after Peter Drucker, of course. And he was previously a professor at the Harvard Business School. He has over 40 years experience in teaching and advising managers and leaders in all sectors of society. And in 2000, I took a course from him in strategy that blew my mind and expanded my awareness of marketing. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff that he teaches or taught me and teaches to his clients, which are very successful clients, I'm sure, across the globe. He is passionate about wealth and well-being creation for next generation family business leaders. And he's focused on managing innovation, entrepreneurship, and change. And so, Vijay, first, welcome to my show.
It's good to see you, Jonathan. It's hard to believe it's been 20 years. I'm so glad we reconnected.
Neither of us look a day older than we were 20 years ago. So tell me, I studied from you took a strategy class. And as I was telling you, I left Peter Drucker's class because he was in his middle or early 90s and a little hard of hearing. And I was so glad that I went next door to your class and studied strategy and Michael Porter's 5 Forces analysis. So now you're teaching on family business. So what is it that got you interested in family businesses? Tell me about maybe some of the challenges that you see for family businesses, and then tell us a little bit about your course. So,
yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be interesting for your readers. I always wonder when somebody is interested in a subject, why did they get interested in that? So I'll give you a 5-minute helicopter tour because you'll see how I think and how I get interested in things. So in my early career, going way back to my PhD dissertation, I was interested in organizations and how they adapt. So the field is called organizational behavior. My PhD is in that subject. And it has served me well because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, it's all about people, right? People have to do something.
100%.
So while I have progressed and wandered, it's been a good discipline to do the early work in. So I was interested in adaptation, change, organization design, and as I got to doing more and more work with clients, I realized that this idea of sort of culture and culture change, culture began to come into the equation. My early work was actually in controllers and controllership. And what I was interested in is how do staff people have an influence in organizations? It's still very relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
And my headline is the best, most effective controllers kind of learn to manage what others saw as a dilemma. And this is one of my themes that throughout the last 30 years I've been interested in, that in management you say, do you want to do A or do you want to do B? And they're sort of in conflict. Now, the cynical answer is, well, management doesn't know what they're doing and they'd better pick one. That's true sometimes, but oftentimes the creative option is to be able to do both, right? The so-called and function.
Right.
So in the case of controllers, just as an example, they're responsible for maintaining the financial integrity of the financial data, presenting information to management that's useful. But some go much beyond that and say, I did a study of 40 companies, and some company CEOs said, if that's all the controller does, I don't need, there's a bookkeeper. What do you expect them to do? Well, the extreme case was I want them to challenge line management with their own way of thinking. Now, to challenge line management, we all know how much level of business understanding you need to have. Otherwise, you'll be laughed out of court, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, rather than, are you just, I called it an independent controller who is concerned about integrity of financial information, which is important, sort of the policeman role, if you like, some people called it, or the other is helping line management to do a better job.
Sure.
Finding ways for line management that line management doesn't see from a financial point of view. And is there a dichotomy between the two? Yes, in a way, because sometimes management wants to step beyond what is legal, ethical, and so those are the times when being able to do both, right, gives you such a lot of advantage. I call that proactive control, because there's no point blowing the whistle after the harm has been done.
Right.
And if you become too much of a policeman, you never get access to the soft information about what people are thinking.
Sure.
It was an early interest that really served me well. So that led to another dichotomy, that in some companies, people thought the company was very well controlled, but there was no entrepreneurship. There again, you see the dilemma, right?
Yep. Yes.
And we went after companies. I remember one company, 3M, said to me, "We don't know what you're talking about when you talk about, do you want there is no dichotomy," they said, which really blew me away.
Right.
And they said, you cannot have excellent entrepreneurship without excellent control. So the entire population, if you do a survey, they say there is a contradiction between entrepreneurship and control, right?
But by the way, 3M seems to manage that very well. I understand they actually devote, or they want their people to spend a certain percentage of their time on innovation projects and products, and so that's an unusual corporation from that standpoint.
So that's what I was, always have been interested sort of in those who defy. So my view of management is that in the normal scheme of things, we all as human beings have certain skills, we see certain contradictions, right? That's human. So call that the baseline.
Mm-hmm.
My definition of outstanding performance is, can you actually do better than that? Because that's kind of the baseline.
Right.
So at 3M, they found ways to do both, right? Completely opposite way of looking at it. And I asked them, how do I study this? And they said, well, you got to stick around and see how we do it. That's how I got interested in culture, because I went back repeatedly to 3M and 3 other companies, watching one division, how they manage. And the CEO suggested these divisions who were very entrepreneurial. So I wanted to understand, like in a big company, there are entrepreneurs, which was another thing, right? So that got me into entrepreneurship and culture, because they said, you'll never understand any of this. Formal systems that we use are no different than any other company. So you're not going to learn anything by watching our systems,
right?
But how we use the systems. And for that, you need to really understand. So I kind of tracked some ventures.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that was work in the 80s that got me into culture change. And one of the fun things why I've loved the Drucker School is, as you know, it's so small. And we are so flexible that as my interests evolved, I could teach that stuff.
Yes.
So by the time you were in my course, I'd been doing change and change management and strategy so long that I had brought that into the classroom. Now, after your time, we can pause there if you have questions.
Yeah. And so I just want to say that we studied a case at Harvard, a Harvard Business Review case, and this was on ServiceMaster. Mm-hmm. And that case, along with the film that you had that went with it, was really powerful for me. It left a tremendous impact on my thinking about culture. Because, and you can tell the story better than I, because this is a company that basically was in the janitorial, which is, let's get dirty. They were in the toilet cleaning business, and they held, cleanliness next to godliness. And I had no idea that the master that they were talking about serving in Service Master's name was like Jesus Christ, the Lord. Yeah. And they built a culture around this sort of religious ideology, but without feeling like it was a religious organization. And it just showed me how strong culture is. And I've often said culture to me is like a cult of ideology, that you just combine the two. And it's an open door. They don't stop you from leaving like a real cult. But it's what, it's how you build something really strong. And it's like I often say the story is how you make really good yogurt is you start with some culture from another piece of good yogurt, and then you move it to the next, and that's what they did. And so very interesting about the role that people and culture can play in probably employee engagement and return on shareholder investment. And so go on. I just digress.
Well, the terms you used about cult and culture may be worth 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a cult, no dissent is tolerated.
Right.
You have the Jonestown experience where you'll drink Kool-Aid and die, but you're not going to question it. So in great cultures, you actually want the ability to have a few people that will question the fundamentals, and they're not thrown out of the camp.
Right.
And the genius of Service Master is they will never let you even necessarily see that it was their faith in God that was driving them, because they said, as far as the customer is concerned, they should get outstanding service.
Right.
But they were not evangelical in trying to convert, their clients. But what drove them was this belief that service to others is service to God. Right?
Yes.
So
Amazing.
they had a very high ideal internally, sort of driving them. But their real success, if you remember, Jonathan, was what they called hard listening. That is humility to listen to the client. And in those days, the clients actually were just wanting, them to come in and do their thing. But they heard that the clients actually were getting tired of taking care of the workforce because, of all the difficulties of managing the workforce. That's what the guy said we heard. So they completely redesigned, talk about disruption.
Mm-hmm.
They completely redesigned their business. So they said, okay, we will take on the job of managing your workers. So you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
We see a lot of, frustration on your part about managing the workforce. So they're still your people, but we will manage them a little bit like the hotel industry. You have managers managing the workforce.
Sure.
So the culture has so many facets to it, but one of them was humility. One of them was real service, because service to the client is service to God.
Yep.
And not putting that, not trying to shove that down the client's, neck and throat, because that's not relevant. But anyway, to continue the journey.
So, and by the way, so in my book, and in the coaching that I do, I spend a lot of time and put a lot of emphasis on the importance of what we call core values and driving those values into the company and living and breathing them and celebrating them and rewarding people based on them and evaluating people based on them. It's so important if you want to build a world-class company, I think, is to have values that are alive and well. And humility is one that is oftentimes a value that my clients choose to have maybe because they read Pat Lencioni's book on the ideal team player and said, humble, hungry, and smart is what we need. But anyway, so keep going.
To me, if you're not humble, you're not learning.
Right.
And if you're not learning, you're going to die.
Right.
So, it's just very much self-preservation. But to continue the journey, after you left, I think I went into a lot of interest in sort of venture capital. Mm-hmm. Because it's a logical, I had done entrepreneurship in big companies, I'd seen it in small companies, and I got interested in VCs. So we did a bunch of work there. And then I got interested in the idea that, we don't know a lot about how you manage the creative side. So I had studied entrepreneurship, I studied innovation, and I always get interested in management when they start using new words, right? So creativity. And you say, how the hell is that different from innovation? Are we playing word games?
Right.
And this is to me quite significant, because if we are playing word games, we are wasting time. But if there's something really different, so where I come out actually in my 2 cents is actually there's a difference between the three: creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation. Mm-hmm. And we lose something when we just sloppily use the terms and throw them around, because each has a distinctive value added. And just briefly, what I would say is, creativity is coming up with new ideas. Now, the whole discussion, are they new to the world or they're new to the company? And most people say new to the world is great, but many ideas actually, just even if they're new to the company and are valuable, that is useful, right? From a practical point of view.
Sure.
But creativity, the literature is not really focused on, is it useful? Is it commercial? Is it pure creativity? Can just be art, it can be anything, right? Mm-hmm. So innovation is sort of translating ideas, including creative ideas, right, into new value creation propositions, into new value, either through products or services. So that's pretty much, and Drucker has this famous book and line, right? The discipline of innovation. So
Right.
it means it is not a random process. There's a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 to get to innovation.
Right.
So then you say, what the hell is entrepreneurship?
And so let's just take an example. So like I think of the, this goes back a few decades, but the drive-through service. That now, as I was a kid growing up, there were drive-through banks and the tellers were drive-through tellers. And if I'm not mistaken, the food services industry saw these drive-throughs and said, well, why don't we make our, our restaurants, our McDonald's, our Burger Kings or whatever, drive-through. And so they creatively looked at another industry. Their creativity was looking at another industry, and the innovation was, how do we adapt this to our industry?
So the fact that it was not new to the world doesn't matter. It
Right.
was new to your industry and it worked.
Correct.
So
Right.
then you say, what is entrepreneurship then? And entrepreneurship is quite different, actually, which many people misunderstand. It's the perception and exploitation of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I see an opportunity that others don't see.
Sure.
I'll give you a classic example. The guy who is buying and selling, but sees opportunity, right? Somebody will say there's nothing creative in that. Maybe not. Maybe there's nothing creative in that, but it is extremely entrepreneurial and opportunity seeking. So I've done some teaching on that, and it came out of my creative economy course. And then now jumping to family business, which is really your main interest.
Right.
What I would say is that two things got me hooked. Number one, I didn't realize all these years of teaching until 10 years ago or so ago, that 60 to 80% of all businesses in the world are family. I just could not believe it. Honestly.
Right.
So luckily, one of the advantages of being older is I know quite a few people, and some of them are actually leaders in family business. So I reached out to one of them who was not my student, but he was a student when I was a professor at Harvard. And I said, it's one of the leaders in the field. And I said, hey, John, is this really the case? And he said, absolutely. So I kept on checking, and I said, so what hit me, Jonathan, is if there's 60 to 80% of the world's companies, why are business schools not doing anything with this? I mean, I know the business school field. I've been at 3 or 4 business schools. I was like intrigued. Now it's there in business schools, but it's like an appendage, right? On the
100%.
side here,
Yep.
we have a family business. And I said,
Right.
that doesn't compute, right? The second thing that intrigued me is that most people don't know, is that, as you know, Peter Drucker was rarely wrong. He was really on target, usually.
Mm-hmm.
He was not wrong about family business, but you will see very little that he has written about family business.
Right.
However, the irony is, and I'm writing about this, the irony is that his philosophy, his way of thinking applies completely well to family businesses, and we can get into that. But I was intrigued because he and another guy named Alfred Chandler, who is a strategy, similar, highly regarded executive from the 60s, a highly regarded academic, also didn't see that family businesses had a future. So I said, two intellectual giants in the 60s did not see family businesses having a long-term leg. I said, how is that possible? And the shorthand answer, I believe, is they didn't think they could professionalize. They were both big on professionalization.
Sure.
They didn't feel that families with their own challenges, understandably, right, of being able to evaluate your brother-in-law and father-in-law and all this stuff, they didn't think. And to me, what's interesting is looking now back from 2020, family businesses have learned how to do that. It's still a challenge, but the best of them have become multi-generational and have done that. So those two are the things that really got me hooked.
Well, and let me share something on that, because I just had a guest on, and it'll give me a moment to remember who it was, but the conventional thinking years ago was that a family business just needed to come up with one innovation every 3 generations. And now they need like three innovations in just 1 generation. So things have changed a lot. And that, I would think, is largely due to the changes in the technology landscape, perhaps. But
Yeah, the whole world is changing at such a fast rate, right? That to survive, all businesses, whether family or not, have to keep adapting and changing. But the special challenge as we get into it for family businesses is this ability to handle the family side well, right? So just to finish on the course, and I'll make my little pitch there, is that because I know a lot of people in the field, and I've taught, as you know, case method a long time.
Sure.
It was easy to ask 3 or 5 of my friends who teach, and I said, "Guys, give me all your stuff, please, because I want to teach this course. And I'm excited about it." So I had wonderful material to draw on. I found a fantastic textbook, which is very recent.
Yep.
I can tell you about that comprehensively covers the field. I do want to say, you asked about orthodoxies and biases. I have the advantage of a relative newcomer to the field.
And so let me just interrupt. And I imagine that John Ward is showing up in some of your literature required reading, because
John Ward, I don't know him personally,
right?
But the people that John Ward has worked with,
yes,
my contacts are people like John Davis at Harvard,
sure,
who was a PhD student when I was there. Great guy. He's gone to the top of the field. I know others in other countries. But
and John Davis was studying, like he was like holed up in a classroom at USC when I was there.
Told me about that.
And I would go over and I'd say, "What are you doing over here? And what is this? I'm really interested in this family business." And it was astounding me. Like, why isn't anyone teaching family business here in this school? And
so I've found that equally intriguing.
Yeah.
But many thanks to John Davis, among many others who helped me. But the point is, I see some biases in the field. And in a way, they're to my benefit, because it is heavily slanted towards the OB discipline. If you look at a lot of the family business professors, like John Davis, and that's a good discipline.
Well, let's just clarify, that's organizational behavior.
Organizational behavior,
right?
That, because you got to talk about conflict and intergenerational, all that fits, right?
It's like therapy it's psychological. It's I don't know, maybe they call it industrial psychology, but I think it's more like family therapy, if you ask me.
Exactly. So
and there's that family systems thinking, which I understand
John Davis and those guys
is a big piece of this, family business consulting work. So
exactly, all that is good.
Yep.
But my journey, as you know, took me from where I was into strategy. I did a lot of work there and creative economy. So I'm not wedded that way to the field of OB. I look at the issues. So I came in and said, "Where is finance in this?"
Right.
Where is strategy? And actually, I sent John Davis a request that I want to teach some stuff on strategy in family business. Oh, he said, "Vijay, just check the website at Harvard and there are 50 cases. I said, "Okay, that's great." So I went and looked at the 50 cases. And every one of them is a strategy case.
Right.
That happens to be a family business.
Right.
I see nothing there that influenced change because it was so I wrote back to John and I said, "Hey, John, these are not strategy cases in family business. These are just strategy cases that happen to be about a family business. Where is the interplay between the family and strategy? That's what I want." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to write that case yourself. You don't have it."
Right. That's interesting. So that's very telling.
So I can talk about that. But to me, that's exciting about family business. How is finance different?
Right.
Because it's a family business. How is strategy different? Because it's, and given where I'm coming from, my background, that's a very interesting question that we haven't asked and we haven't talked about. I mean, we meaning in the business school community.
Yep. So that is interesting, and I guess that's something you found really interesting about family business. But I did, you asked me to talk. Let's talk about some orthodoxies in the field of family businesses that are ripe for challenge. And I asked you the question is like, why do family businesses matter? And I know that sounds kind of contradictory to maybe listeners. I wrote a book for family businesses, but that to me is the question. Like, do they matter and why? But what are your thoughts on some orthodoxies that are ripe for challenge?
Yeah, so that's how we got started in our previous dialogue. I think when I said, who cares if you're a family business?
Right.
Why should we care? So the first answers you get are the statistics I cited.
Yeah.
Right, 60% or 80%, and so they're worth looking at because they're a huge amount of the economy in terms of GDP and in terms of employment. But as we dig deeper, you find that some of the Drucker values are actually, as I said, very present. So concern about the community, which Drucker talks about. Because of their intrinsic nature, family businesses, since their name is on the door, have to be more concerned about the community, right?
Yes.
It's not all done for pure charity. It's in the self-interest, which is always the best, right? When self-interest coincides with what is good for society. And so they have that. They take care of their employees.
Yes.
Much better than most people.
Yep.
Right? So there are some other attributes to me, other than GDP, that are worth preserving. And so that's why I think family businesses are quite important from a societal point of view.
Let's add something else that I can't say anything like that's backed by data, but the culture of our society, the fabric of our society, like the would fall apart more if we didn't preserve them, maybe. Now, I don't know how to back that up more, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it makes sense based on what we just said. You know, if you have 60 to 80% of entities where their self-interest aligns with taking care of people better, taking care of communities better, right? It stands to reason that when you add it all up, it is having a cumulative positive impact. So all that is excellent, right? Now, when you talk about orthodoxies, here is one that I began to get really interested in. And this is more true of, I would say, Asian countries. As you know, I come originally from India, so I've got some dialogue going with family businesses in India, but also because of Drucker, we have connections in Japan, in China.
Right.
But it's also true to some extent in the US, not so much, but still, you know, if you look at it globally, it's an issue. And the issue is this: why should we care about family legacy? Okay. And I'm just talking to these guys have you heard about Tugboat Institute? It's a very interesting little organization.
I have not.
I just spoke with Dave Wharton, who is the head of the institute. He created this Tugboat Institute. And there's some family businesses in there, 4, 5, 6, 6. But interestingly, they are not actually calling themselves Family Business Institute, right? But my understanding is they want to talk about companies that have a long-term impact for good on society. So some of them are, for example, they've got Edward Jones in their membership, and Edward Jones is a partnership.
Okay.
But in terms of what they call evergreen companies, these are companies that don't rely on venture capital. You know, they're not trying to exit the business. They're trying to have long-term good for employees, just like we are talking.
Right.
So I'm still learning all about that, but for family businesses, because they're not exclusively family business. Those family businesses that want those things, right? Long-term, no exit, belong to them.
Right.
But if you take the family business lens, what the orthodoxy says is that we must have legacy, right? We must, because legacy means we will continue to do good.
Sure.
Understandable. But there's another point of view that deserves to be on the table, this point of view. And that is, what about the kids who are not interested? Because some of these kids are my students, okay, who tell me, I am literally being forced. And remember now, in the Asian culture,
it's an honor culture, so you're almost like expected, right? Exactly. Required.
So it's like so I'm at the age and stage, Jonathan, that particularly businesses in India where I have a special connection. I say to people who are in their 60s, who are younger than me, right? I say, hey guys, with all due respect, why are you forcing your kids?
Right.
You have some wealth, you have some network. Why don't you think about what's good for them? What is their passion? And believe me, that's like a pause, and out of respect, they don't say too much more because, hey, I'm a professor and I'm older. So, but I say, guys, push back, because I'll tell you what I see. I tell these leaders, I see selfishness.
Yes, I agree.
I see me, I want. Why don't you talk about what they want? So that gets the tension.
But that's but you I don't know how many years you've been in the States, but I'm many years, I'm sure.
50 plus.
Yeah. So and I'm born and raised here, and our bias is that this is an independent, sort of selfish society, I think, and So Asia's got a lot of catching up to do if they're going to, I know they're opening up their country to more capitalist and liberal philosophies, but this is a game changer for them to think, well, we've made our wealth and what's best interest for our child. So I'm 100% on board with you.
But this is changing. Of course, this is not everyone.
Right.
But when you talk about orthodoxies, even the literature keeps talking about, how many generations have this gone on? Meaning implicitly, the longer the better. And I'm saying that's only half the equation. Can you also tell me about that's why I said wealth and well-being. So I'll tell you a little bit about my course before we end. But I want to talk about wealth and well-being because I've now come across 20 companies that I've got to know pretty well. They come and essentially co-teach with me in my class, and I've got to know them well over 2-3 years. And not all of them, in fact, the majority of them, there's a lot of family turbulence, right?
Yes.
So I'm asking the question, at what cost? We need to have both. We need to have wealth and well-being. And if you put your lens that way, you will get other creative solutions, right, coming out of this.
100%.
And maybe one of the solutions is that the family doesn't need to run the business. And we've got cases of that. Well, also, the family can completely exit and do something totally different also.
And so what we're seeing, I think, is a few different things. One is something called transgenerational entrepreneurship, where the next generation becomes an entrepreneur in their own right in some other field or discipline. We're seeing the impact of private equity coming in and buying these family businesses. And so they're the family's recapitalizing their equity, and they're taking their stakes, and maybe they're keeping the real estate as a holding, and then maybe going and investing in other operating companies or just being a real estate, maybe holding company. So we're seeing some changes, but yeah, it's a really interesting set of questions, I think, that gets pushed upon these people now.
One footnote which may interest you, talking about Japan, and I think Japan is the only country in my book, not India, not China, at least my little informal knowledge of specific companies. In Japan, I know 2 companies now that it would make a lot of sense, given the family situation, for them to sell. I've been a kind of an advisor to one of them. Okay? And you know what is stopping them from selling? It's amazing. I don't think any country in the world is quite like this. At the end of the day, they're saying if we sell, we will be betraying our employees. Okay. So in your example, a private equity firm takes over.
Yes.
We know what private equity firms do, and I'm not putting them down. They're going to be extremely businesslike and maybe bring the discipline that was candidly missing.
Yes.
So, when I talk to family business leaders coming the other way, following Drucker, I tell them this common problem of loyalty, right? So the person has been very helpful to you in the early days, but now 30 years later, they're not keeping up, they're not performing, and I don't want to let them go because of a sense of loyalty. And what I tell them is Drucker would tell you that's a misplaced sense of loyalty. You're actually doing a disservice to these people.
I 100% agree. And I talk about that in my book because if a person is not performing at their optimal level, then, you keeping them around. And this makes it harder, by the way, once they hit an age of maybe 60 or over and their options for future employment are more limited. But it's not good for the business. We talk about the C player trap, where you spend most of your time, helping and coaching and, fixing the C player problems. It drags the whole culture down of the company. So you have to be humanistic, I think, and find a way to help this person maybe transition. Maybe they fit the core values, so you can find them another seat, or position in the company. But you need to figure out a way of maybe coaching them out if they just don't fit. And that's a job of what I call a disruptive successor, who's taking over mom or dad's, like hand-me-down employees that they don't want anymore. And it's a difficult thing, but it's always better, I think, for everybody.
So you mentioned transgenerational wealth creation. This is music to my ears. And maybe we can end, or at least I want to talk about my course at this point, because it may resonate with your younger family members, or anyone who wants to learn, right?
Yeah.
So in my course, what is different is that rather than have cases, which can be nice, I was so lucky that I made up the whole course. And then I said, let me see if I can get real family business people to partner with me to co-develop something, right? And the way I do it, Jonathan, that I think you found intriguing was that, and I don't know how much I did that in strategy when you took it, because, in strategy, the discipline is so well developed.
Right.
The cases are so good, and the job is of analysis.
Yes.
So the way I taught it was basic foundational strategy. I didn't bring in that many visitors.
And we're going to get there in a minute before we sign off. So
just to finish this one, in this one, I felt the field was so open.
Yeah.
Plus, I had, talk about orthodoxies. To me, that's the main orthodoxy. Don't just talk to me about wealth. I must hear all the time also well-being of all the family members involved.
Sure.
Now, this is a value statement, right? This is my values. Because I'm not interested in just wealth creation that destroys people's lives.
Of course.
That's not interesting to me. Nor am I interested in just people who are having a good time that are not creating any value. So I want both, right? Now, having said that, I didn't find enough stuff that I could use. So in this course, what we do is we use a book by this guy Zellweger. I highly recommend it for that kind of a course, which is very academically based, the latest research, but it's very practical. He's got some frameworks that I think you will enjoy if you see them, like about 10 of them in the book.
And tell us what the name of the book is so that I can...
Yes, it's called Managing the Family Business.
Okay.
By Zellweger. It's Zellweger.
Okay, Managing the Family
Zellweger.
Business.
He's a Swiss. There's a very, very good school in Switzerland at St. Gallen that he's a professor. And so anyway, I had the benefit, and it's very recent, 2017. I wrote to him and said, thank you so much for writing this book. Just in time for my course. I appreciate that a lot.
Perfect. Yes. Commissioned work.
So
Thank you.
We've got to know each other well. And so I've got a great backbone, intellectual backbone to the course, right? So students read the book. But I said, I'm not going to teach the book. I mean, this is a graduate course. So they're going to apply the ideas to not just a case, but a live case. So let's say one of your businesses wanted to do the case with me, and I felt it fit. We would have a conversation. Normally, it takes me 2 or 3 conversations of an hour or so to get to know the company, to get to know a kind of a critical point where we can pause. And the business leader and I then develop sort of PowerPoint slides in 20 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. Take them through the company, the family, the business, and end with a critical sort of fork in the road. At which point the family business leader sits down, I take the stage, and I tell the students, okay, don't tell me we don't have enough information, because we will never have enough information.
Right.
What are we going to do?
And now, so I understand, are you bringing business leaders into the classroom to tell that story in a PowerPoint sort of format, and then there's a cliffhanger, and now the students are there to solve the problem, and the family business is brought in. Now, are you drawing from local family businesses?
All over. I've got an Italian company, a Chile company. I've got global companies, but also local companies.
Because I know there's a lot of Asian family businesses out in Claremont. So I was wondering if that cultural.
I just took people, Jonathan, as you know me. If you're not willing to be open about some of the delicate and sensitive issues,
right, we
are wasting time.
Okay.
And with family businesses, I learned that this is very sensitive. You're talking about your dad. And I said, look, I highly respect that. We can disguise the case. So I've got a Canadian case that's heavily disguised. So we don't reveal who the real company is.
Okay.
But my rule is, if you cannot be open about the sensitive issues, right, it's not going to work. And I was amazed, Jonathan. I was not sure, but I was amazed. It takes time. But people have come back, and they have been more and more open as they got comfortable.
That's great. And so the family business does come to the classroom, or you're gonna do it probably via Zoom, I guess, at this point.
Zoom. But I'm doing it next in May, June. And my headline is that I've been at this university long enough that I could convince the university powers that be that said, look, in family businesses, there are a lot of talented young people and other people right, who are not necessarily interested in a degree or a credential, but they want the education, right? So
Right.
can we not please allow these people, as long as they qualify, which is a bachelor's degree and some business experience, that's
Right.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we allow them to come in the class? Everybody will benefit, right?
Sure.
And now I'm happy to tell you I've done that. The university has agreed that the fee will be $3,500 for my course. I don't get a cent, but the university needs that. And then you get a credential. It'll say you took a course at the Claremont Graduate University, you got 4 units of credit. And if you ever want to take a credential with us, a master's or MBA, you get credit for that. So I'd make a big pitch for anyone who is interested, to please reach out to you or me.
Sure.
Because I think this is a really win-win proposition where, in an educational setting, you get some MBAs, some executives, as well as some family business types. And I have done one now. I've got one family business leader who we have put through, and she loved it. So,
well, I think that it would be very attractive, since your course could be marketed globally, would be to look for next generation leaders, or rising gen leaders, as they're called in other countries, because they might be 60 and still rising to the throne. The torch hasn't been passed. They call it the sticky baton syndrome, I understand. But these would be people who, if they could bring their families to a live kind of case study, their fellow students would weigh in on the issues, the problems that are presenting themselves, and so fascinating. Okay, so I'm sure you can't teach that course without bringing in some strategy stuff.
Yes.
And I know I learned so much from you around Michael Porter's 5 forces analysis. So I want to wrap up with that. So tell us what that analysis is useful for, and why every company in any industry should be using this strategic framework to think through the attractiveness of their industry, the opportunities for them. Because this gets into also, how do I improve? This is a controller making a recommendation for how do I improve the bottom line and increase the value of this business. So tell us a little bit about what it is.
So the biggest value, as you know, Jonathan, is that I'm trying to break the frame and mindset of the people. Start with a new framing. So what happens I'm looking at it more like a consultant now going into a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
you're going to a firm, and usually if they call you in, unfortunately, they don't call you in typically when they're doing great, which is when they should call you,
right?
Because that's when we can do stuff. But
Right.
usually they call us in when already they're in trouble, so the performance is not maybe that good. Human beings as we are, we try to rationalize why the performance is not so bad after all. If you look at this and if you look at that, they're not so bad. And that's the thing I want to break them out of. And that applies even for people who are successful, and maybe more so for them who say, oh, we are doing great. So what I say is, you're doing whatever you're doing, right, is great and not good. We'll figure that out. Question is, compared to what? I mean, who do you want to compare yourself to? And most people say, we need to look obviously at competitors. Okay,
right.
So let's look at competitors.
Sure.
Now, that was the traditional sort of Harvard Business School analysis all the way from the 1900s to, Michael Porter's arrival around the late 70s. And I was lucky to be there at that exciting time. But the next thing that one could ask is, so you're going to compare just with your competitor.
Which, by the way, if you do that, I think, the exercise that's really useful is some sort of an attribution map, which is, what are the attributes of the competitors? What services, products, features do they offer? And what do we offer? And, what's the stack look like of our offerings versus theirs?
Yes.
Too simplistic, very.
But it's a start.
Start.
Just like SWOT is a start. It's
Yep.
Strengths, weaknesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it historically, the way I look at it, that's how strategy was taught, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
So that becomes kind of the center of the analysis for the 5 forces, right? So that's one force right in the middle.
Yep.
The intensity of direct competition.
Right.
I think the reason Porter has been so amazingly successful and has opened up people's minds is he changed the unit of analysis from a company to an industry.
Sure.
The strategy has always been taught, as a company thing, right? But to come back to that, he said, let's change the frame to the industry. And that changes the whole game because it changes the mindset. So now we become industry players. So when I'm in a company, I have to tell them, and this takes sometimes a little time, you go through a few sessions.
Right.
Put on the hat of the industry now. You no longer work for ABC company. You no longer work for your competitor either. You are in XYZ company of the industry. Okay, so as an industry, what impacts the profitability of the industry? So the framing has been changed completely, right? And you say, okay, there are basically two substitutes and two possibilities, right? So first of all, if your industry is attractive, it's possible that others will try to enter the industry who are not right now your direct competitors, right?
Right.
And that leads to that analysis of, okay, but they will try to get in, but how easy is it to get in? What are the barriers to entry? I think the other one that people always forget is the close substitutes, right? That depending on price points, people can migrate to a very close substitute in a related industry. So you got those forces, and then pure bargaining power, right? What is your bargaining power against your customers? What is your bargaining power? So what I do is actually with just a little bit of prep, like maybe in your book or some basics like this.
Sure.
You say, okay, guys, you are no longer, let's say the management team, and family businesses can do that also, right? Bring in your top team. I would not be only family businesses. I'd make sure there are some top salespeople and others in there in your business. And now you do the analysis with all of them and you say, okay, let's individually do the analysis, start comparing notes. And what I find is you get a much richer analysis because these guys know their industry and they start talking about those. So at the end of the day, when it is done, what you can say, okay, guys, now this looks like the industry is relatively profitable, for example.
Right.
And you say, wait a minute, and you guys already are not doing well when in the industry is profitable. So you got a new benchmark, right?
Sure.
Or the other way sometimes that you find the industry is really tough and not profitable. And these guys, although not doing great, when you really look at the industry, they're not doing badly. So you say, wait a minute, you guys are beating up yourselves, but actually when you look at the industry, you're doing pretty good. I mean, so it's a, heavy, the high end is, Jonathan, I found every time I do it, it's therapeutic. Because it changes the frame of reference from me, the company, or my competitor. And once you do that, as you know very well, it opens up all kinds of new avenues for innovation.
Well, and it's very different than what we call the SWOT analysis, which goes beyond SWOT and it looks at basically the trends, which is where we're looking at political or, regulatory, economic, social, technological, international, and maybe throw in legislative that's pending. I mean, that's a different level of analysis. So, all right. So, Professor, I'm going to.
What I would say before we close.
Yes, on
the last thing you said.
Yep.
I would say that once you do the 5 forces analysis, right?
Yep.
Now you bring in the trends, and you say, okay, we've done the analysis.
Okay.
Now let's look at the trend in terms of political environment. How is that going to change the 5 forces, right? Look at the next trend, technological innovation. How is that going to? So you can see the analytical power you get because you have a baseline and a framework that is so solid. So now you can assess how the forces are going to change based on the trends.
So if a student listening to this, of the student of life, the world, wants to really understand this, I could think of no more interesting case to study right now than the automotive industry, where Tesla is, as of yesterday, and I know this is news going to be old by the time you're listening to this, but Tesla just announced that they're going to issue, I think, another $5 billion worth of shares of their company, and it didn't impact their stock price whatsoever, which suggests to me that, first of all, valuation methodologies are a thing of the past, but more importantly, that they are completely disrupting the automotive industry and the whole proposition has changed. And so as you look at the automotive industry where GM and Ford and, the big three in America and Toyota and Honda were fighting, here comes this complete upstart with a different value proposition. And suddenly, it's, the cost of getting into the business is different. The negotiating power with suppliers and buyers, they've completely disrupted the rivalry and the intensity of this. So maybe you want to speak about this better than I am, or there's some go-to literature that they could, read to understand the application of this analysis?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is at some point you're going to create a new industry, right? I mean,
yes.
How you draw the industry boundaries becomes really interesting.
Yes.
And my advice typically is do it 2 or 3 ways. So do it the conventional way.
Right.
But some people believe this whole industry is going to be obliterated.
Right.
There's going to be a whole new industry that has to do with transportation. Who wants to own a car? I want to get from A to B.
Right. So one way.
You change the industry to not owning an automobile, but getting from A to B.
Yes.
Then in this new analysis, you've got to also put in Uber and all these other guys.
Right.
So to me, the fun thing about industry analysis is the creative part is when you see disruption like this, you can do it the conventional way also, but you can also ask, is this going to change fundamentally the industry itself? And in that case, what does the new industry look like?
Right. So are we talking about the automotive industry? Are we talking about the transportation getting from point A to point B industry? Or are we talking about the electric, solar battery powered, industry,
So how you draw the industry boundaries is
very interesting.
And rather than get dogmatic about this is the way to draw, that misses the point. To me, the whole point is to get insight. And so try it 2 or 3 different ways and see if you're learning anything new from that.
Great. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, maybe especially for us, but hopefully for the listeners as well. And Vijay, how do people get a hold of you? It'll be in the show notes, but is it
the best way is my email.
Yep.
Which is vijay.sathe.
Yep.
At CGU for Claremont Graduate University.
Yep.
.edu.
Okay. So vijay.sathe at cgu.edu, and we'll have that spelled out. Thank you very much for being a guest on my show. Folks, if you are interested in learning about the family and how your family business could work better, then this is a go-to resource for you here. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show, a show by, for, and about family businesses. And remember to share this episode with others. And thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.